Many of us are familiar with the story of Ruth and Naomi. It's a story about family. It's a broken family with empty places in the family photos. It's about Grandma Naomi without baby pictures in her purse. There's no husband in the armchair next to her as they grow old in a comfortable retirement village. The visits from her sons are unfulfilled memories and broken dreams. The spaces in her life that she imagined being full of joy and love are now empty of everything but sorrow and bitterness. It's a terrible irony for a woman whose name means pleasantness and delight. And what's even worse is that this lonely woman finds herself in the company of two other women in a similar plight. They're her daughter-in-laws, widowed and childless. They're with her in the wreckage of what was their happy life. So Naomi decides to return to Judah and expects that her daughter-in-laws will go back to their own homes and their lands and find new families and new husbands to marry. The girls still have a chance at family if they just leave this empty place. But through teary eyes, the girls refuse to leave and refuse to kiss her goodbye. They hold on to the fragments of family, and together they travel the lonely and difficult way with Naomi. The three of them, widowed, childless, and broken women, struggle in tandem, together, but alone on their way. Naomi cannot find her worth outside the relationship with a husband or a son, and she urges her daughter-in-laws again to leave her and leave this bitter life and find new husbands of their own. She certainly is not going to have more sons for them to marry, but if they go back to their own families, they might have a chance of starting again without the bitter burden that she bears. And one of the daughter-in-laws kisses her and leaves. And her story isn't recorded any further. But the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, clings to Naomi. And the word cling in this text is used the same way for people making marriage vows, that they leave their own families and cling together. Ruth has chosen to cling to Naomi and regard her as her family. Here's what the scriptures record about this event. This is from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. As the story moves on, the two women do arrive in Bethlehem, and they are greeted by the other women who say, "Is this Naomi?" Or maybe they say, "Is this Naomi?" Or, "Is this Naomi?" We don't know from Scripture, right? Inflection is not recorded, but what we do know is that Naomi has decided to interpret it as being empty. Naomi is older, she's widowed, she is childless. She has a daughter-in-law with her of extraordinary loyalty and commitment. So there could be a positive view of Naomi's current situation. But Naomi has already decided to interpret her situation as the Lord bringing calamity upon her and leaving her empty. She even states that her name should be Mara to reflect the bitterness of her situation. Now, through this scene, I imagine that Ruth is standing beside her mother-in-law silently. Because what do you say when someone says, "I am alone"? Her companionship is a blessing to Naomi, even though this family doesn't see it now. There is a potential for their story to take a positive turn. And after all, in Bethlehem, it's the beginning of the barley harvest. And the barley harvest is good news for Ruth and Naomi. Because when barley is being harvested, not every piece is picked up by the workers, and those who are less fortunate are allowed to glean after the workers have gone through. Now, Ruth fits all three categories of needy people who are given permission to glean in the fields of others: the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. So Ruth goes out to glean. And as chance would have it, she happens to fall upon the field belonging to Boaz. Not only has Ruth happened to be in his field, but he also happens to be there that day. And Ruth finds favor with Boaz, which in Bible speak means that she's cute, and he would like her for his own. And we get hints that maybe she is also thinking the same of him. Boaz then sets Ruth up for gleaning success. She is able to glean in one day many days' worth of grain, and he also allows her to eat with him and his servants. And normally those who are gleaning wouldn't be allowed to do that or take part in that meal in any way. And he gives her the same portion as he gives to his men. Ruth eats until she is satisfied and still has leftovers to take to Naomi. So when Ruth comes home with a huge amount of barley plus prepared food for Naomi to eat, Naomi realizes that something more than gleaning had happened today. So when Naomi finds out that it is Boaz's field, and Boaz happens to be a relative of her deceased husband, she says to Ruth, he, Boaz, is one of our relatives. And more specifically, he's the kind of relative that could help them. He's the kind of relative that has some role in family legal affairs, the kind of relative that has power to make things right. And Ruth is able to provide Naomi with something more than food if this all works out. There is hope that their family is going to be redeemed. Now, Naomi reminds Ruth when she goes back to glean to stay with the other women so that she remains eligible for marriage, specifically marriage to Boaz. And Naomi provides a plan for this marriage to be a reality by having Ruth make Boaz an offer he won't refuse at night after she's bathed and anointed herself with oil. When Boaz finds her at his feet that night, he is glad that Ruth did not go after the younger men, and he is happy that she wants to be with him. But there is another relative that's a closer connection to Naomi that should be the redeemer here and should buy the land from Naomi. If that relative will not, Boaz promises that he will provide for Naomi and he will marry Ruth. Either way, Naomi and Ruth will have a home. And Boaz gives Ruth a large measure of barley seeds, which she brings home to Naomi. Their little family is full of seeds of promise. But they still need a man, Boaz, to completely restore their family. There is nothing left to do for them but to wait and see if Boaz is able to pull off his part of the plan in the public sphere before the town elders, as well as Ruth was able to pull off her part of the plan last night in the darkness. Boaz meets with the next of kin the next day, and this next of kin isn't given a name in our story, that's how important he is, and tells him about the land that Naomi is selling. The next of kin is interested in the land, but not as interested when Boaz adds that marriage to Ruth would be part of the deal. The marriage to Ruth would not customarily be linked to land. However, when Boaz mentions that he himself would marry her to maintain the name of the dead, he's saying that the child that he and Ruth will have rights to that land in question. So by linking Naomi's land to the marriage of Ruth and carrying on the dead man's name, Ruth and Naomi are able to maintain their mother-daughter relationship, which is what Ruth wanted Boaz to do, after all. The other relative gives up his right to the land, allows Boaz to marry Ruth, and keep the family together. Boaz has fulfilled the role of redeemer, and Mr. What's-His-Name is now out of the picture. Ruth and Boaz are married, and they have a son. And Naomi is a real grandma now. And in her arms is that baby boy who will take care of her in her old age and provide her with a hope and a future. They named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Naomi's baby album has full of pictures now, and it grows into a family album that will one day include her great-great-great-great-great-great, you get the idea, right, grandson, Jesus. At the beginning of the story, Naomi is empty, and at the end, she is full. The women of Bethlehem praise her for having a daughter-in-law that is worth more than 7 sons. It's hard for me to imagine someone simply getting over the loss of a husband and 2 sons and replacing them, or even replacing 7 sons with a daughter-in-law. It's not quite the same. But somehow there are people in our lives that help us get through these losses. They don't really replace the ones we've lost, but they help us to love again, to be in relationships again, and to be a family again. Now I have a fish story for you today too, and it's not the usual, it was this big fish story either, but like all great fish stories, I believe that this story too, the family will be able to grow. Like our scripture today, the story begins with 3 broken-hearted people. There are 3 men between the ages of 29 and 32 who are not bound together by blood, but by a common experience. The experience of losing their fathers too soon. The first man lost his father at the angry age of 16. The second man, as he joined his father in the family sales business, moving into his father's office, it felt crowded, but now it feels empty. The third lost his father just after the birth of his first son, the only grandchild his father would ever hold. There are traditions which are passed from father to son, just like there are traditions passed from mother to daughter, and there is fatherly advice and motherly advice that goes through generations of a family. But you see, there are some father-son traditions that aren't the same if mom tries to fill in for dad. And besides, Mom doesn't like to fish. So these three men decide that they're going to go fishing together. It's not the same as fishing with their dads. Two good friends don't replace a dad. But having these friends to fish with does bring a fullness to a place in their life that was empty. They can share the big fish stories, right? They can talk about the best places to get bait. They can talk about how they tie knots and traditions for what they do after they catch the first fish and other man stuff. They can be in touch with a time and place that they ache to go again. Hearts twinge as the first line is cast on the cold, misty morning. No one talks. They don't need to. Everyone feels the ache from that old, wounded heart as they remember the first time they fished with Dad. The fish stories he told. The way he showed them to bait their hooks and tie knots. You know, it's good to fish on a rainy morning because the fish are more likely to bite. And if there are tears, no one notices. Or at least they can pretend not to notice. And as the sun rises, so do the hopes that these new memories will help dull the ache for the past. At the break for lunch, their silence is also broken with talk of maybe a different fishing hole that might be luckier today, or which local diner we're going to have dinner at tonight. It's a good thing that there's a few in town to choose from, because the place that Dad loved best is still too hard to go to. Maybe next time. And the friends understand instantly. Two friends that understand are worth their weight in gold. You see, if you teach a man to fish, if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he will eat for a lifetime. But if you stand beside that man and fish with him, and share stories and adventures and traditions, and you fill some of the emptiness in his heart. Now, Third Church, how do we do this? How do we become daughters to the daughterless, or fathers to the fatherless? How can we fill the emptiness and relieve the ache of loss for someone else? Well, we have been doing this, and we will do this, and we are doing this, all of those things. When we do this, when we're present for those who are fatherless or daughterless, when we sit beside those who mourn and just offer a comforting hug, when we adopt a grandparent and visit them in their retirement home, when we tie a shoe for a preschooler whose mom couldn't get to this field trip, and when taking the boys fishing includes more than just your biological sons. Third Church, we can do this if we can love as Ruth loved Naomi. We can do this if we love others as Christ has loved us.